One decision, one conversation, and Brian's life turned upside down. Could one wild idea save his marriage, or will everything fall apart? You won't believe the mind games that followed. Watch the story unfold. My name is Brian Carter, and I'm 41 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, with my wife, Megan Carter, who is 35. We've been married for a little over 6 years, and although we've had our ups and downs like any couple, our marriage has always seemed solid, until recently. I want to tell you about how our marriage almost fell apart. It started like any normal day. I was reading an article online about recent discoveries in space, discussing how new data from satellites had reshaped what we know about the universe. It's fascinating how we base so much of what we believe on theories and facts, and then new information comes along, and suddenly those truths are replaced. That got me thinking about life and how uncertain everything can be, even relationships. That's when Megan walked into the living room with an unusual expression on her face. She was always the upbeat, cheerful one, but something about her posture, her hand firmly placed on her hip and the look in her eyes, told me that this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. She took a deep breath and said, "Brian, this Friday, I'm going on a date." At first, I thought she was joking. A date? We've been together for years. What kind of joke was that? But then she continued. It's with a colleague from work. He's a nice guy, and I think I need to explore something different for myself. It's not that I don't love you, because I do. But I feel like I'm missing out on experiences, and I want to broaden my horizons. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Megan had always been independent, but this was completely out of character. She had never given any indication that she wanted to see other people. "I'll always come back to you," she added, as if that would make the situation better. "You and I are forever, but I want to meet new people, explore new things. This will make us stronger in the long run." As I sat there, a rush of emotions flooded through me: anger, confusion, betrayal. I wanted to shout, but something stopped me. Megan wasn't looking for a fight. She had already made up her mind. So, instead of reacting in the way she probably expected, I took a different approach. I thought back to when I was a kid reading Tom Sawyer and how Tom had tricked his friends into painting his fence by making the chore seem appealing. The idea sparked something in me. Instead of reacting with rage or sadness, I decided to play along, to flip the situation on its head, just like Tom had done. I leaned back in my chair, forced a smile, and said, "That's an interesting idea, Megan." "Wow, I hadn't even considered that kind of possibility." "Friday, you say?" "Great, I'll keep that in mind." Megan's face went pale. She clearly hadn't expected this reaction. She was probably bracing herself for a fight, but instead, I gave her nothing but calm enthusiasm. Her brow furrowed slightly as she processed my response. "Oh, I'm glad you're okay with it," she mumbled, visibly thrown off balance. "I thought you'd be angry." "I'm not angry," I replied with exaggerated excitement. "Actually, this opens up new opportunities for both of us. There's this woman I've met a few times at the gym, she's been giving me signals for a while. I've always turned her down, but now, well, this changes things, doesn't it?" I got up, stretching my arms as if I were completely relaxed, and walked towards the kitchen. "I'll grab some water," I said over my shoulder, still grinning. "You don't want anything?" Megan stood frozen, her face drained of color. No. "I'm good," she croaked, her voice shaky and unsure. Inside, I was holding back laughter. The image of her shocked expression was priceless. My plan had worked better than I thought. She was uncomfortable, maybe even regretting her little announcement. But I wasn't done yet. As I reached the calendar on the kitchen wall, I muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Let's see, tomorrow's Thursday. That woman from the gym usually comes in the mornings. I'll need to make sure I'm there early enough to talk to her. I hope she hasn't moved on to someone else." Oh, I bet she'll love hearing that we're open to this new arrangement. I said it all with the same casual tone I'd use for planning a grocery run. Then, just to add a little twist, I said, damn, I hope she's available on Friday too. That would be fun, right? Megan and I both out on dates, exploring new horizons. What a great way to spend a Friday. I grabbed a glass of water and took a slow sip, watching Megan out of the corner of my eye. She was staring at me, utterly stunned. I leaned against the counter, pretending to be lost in thought. She has such a nice figure. I've been resisting, but now, well, why not, right? Her silence was heavy. I knew she was struggling to respond, but what could she say? She had opened this door, and now I was walking through it in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't part of her plan. I returned to the living room, pretending to casually flip through the article I had been reading earlier, though I couldn't focus on a single word. My attention was entirely on Megan. She stood there, still processing what had just happened. I could tell she was thinking about what to say next, but no words came. Her body language screamed discomfort. The confident, determined woman who had walked into the room minutes ago was gone, replaced by someone who didn't seem so sure anymore. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with a new plan. After what felt like an eternity of awkward silence, she finally muttered, I think I'm going to head to bed early. I'm feeling a bit tired. Without making eye contact, she slowly made her way toward the stairs, her footsteps hesitant and uncertain. All right, I replied nonchalantly, barely looking up. I'll be up in a bit. I want to finish reading this article first. She paused halfway up the stairs and turned to face me. I love you, Brian. There was a strange vulnerability in her voice, and for a moment, I felt the weight of it. I knew this was a pivotal moment in our relationship. The situation had escalated far beyond what either of us had anticipated, and the road ahead was uncharted. I love you too, Megan, I said softly, trying to match the sincerity in her tone. As she disappeared up the stairs, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the article on my screen. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. Could we really come back from this? Was our marriage strong enough to survive this new arrangement she was suggesting? And did she truly understand what she had triggered with her announcement? In the quiet of the house, I began to reflect on the subtle changes in Megan's behavior over the past few weeks. Little things that had seemed insignificant at the time now started to stand out, whispered phone calls, giggles at texts she never shared, and that odd sense of distance I had felt from her. Suddenly, my gut told me something wasn't right. I walked over to my laptop and opened up the phone records from our shared mobile account. Megan and I had always been transparent with each other, so we had access to each other's call logs. I scrolled through the recent activity and noticed a number that had been popping up frequently over the past 2 weeks, calls and texts, all during the evenings, when she usually said she was talking to her sister. I double-checked the contact list and confirmed what I feared. This wasn't her sister's number. It was someone else entirely. Who the hell was this? I wrote down the number and, feeling a surge of suspicion, decided to dig deeper. A quick search revealed the name associated with the number, Daniel Monroe. He lived right here in Seattle. My heart sank. This was no ordinary colleague. With my heart pounding, I dug a little deeper. I logged into Megan's work account. She worked as the head of human resources at Paramount Solutions, a mid-sized engineering firm. I'd helped her with tech stuff before, so I knew her login information. Within seconds, I was scrolling through employee records, searching for Daniel Monroe. There he was. He had been with the company for about 8 months. He wasn't just some random colleague, he worked in the same department, and judging by his job description, he probably interacted with Megan almost daily. It all clicked into place. The late-night phone calls, the texts that made her smile, this wasn't just an innocent work friendship. Megan had crossed a line, and whether she had physically cheated yet or not, her emotional connection to this man felt like a betrayal. I sat there in the dark, staring at the computer screen, my mind reeling. What was my next move? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part of me, the part that had been blindsided by her earlier announcement, wanted to play this out. Megan thought she could walk into our marriage, change the rules, and I just accept it. No. If she wanted to play games, I could play too. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. There was still a chance to turn this around, but not by exploding in anger. I needed to stay calm and controlled. I needed to get inside her head, just like she had tried to do with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head, analyzing every little detail. What had changed? Why now? And more importantly, why this guy? By the next morning, I had a plan. When I woke up early the next day, I acted like everything was perfectly normal. I got dressed, hummed a little tune as I packed my gym bag, and kissed Megan on the cheek before heading out the door. "See you later, babe," I said with a smile, trying to keep the tone light. Her response was delayed. "Yeah, see you," she replied, watching me carefully as I left the house. I headed to FitLife Gym, the place I'd been going to for the past couple of years. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed. Today, though, I wasn't really there to work out. I needed time to think, to decide how I was going to approach this situation. I spent a couple of hours lifting weights, but my mind was far from the gym. It was with Megan and this Daniel guy, trying to piece together how I was going to navigate this mess. When I got home that evening, Megan was already there. Her car was in the garage, and the hood was still warm. She had just arrived. I walked into the house, greeted her with a casual, "Hey, baby," and went straight to our bedroom, tossing my gym bag on the floor. As I changed out of my gym clothes, I called over my shoulder, "Can we talk a little about this weekend? I think we should set some ground rules, just so we're on the same page." Megan's voice was shaky when she responded. "Yeah, I think we should talk. I already ordered dinner, Chinese. I hope that's okay." "Perfect," I said, noting the tremor in her voice. She was nervous, which was exactly what I wanted. When I walked into the kitchen, the food had already arrived. We began filling our plates from the takeout containers, and as we sat down at the table, I decided to start the conversation. "So," I said, my tone casual, "since you've had some time to think about things, and I've only just started wrapping my head around this whole new relationship model," I made a few notes. "Just a couple of guidelines to make sure we don't step on each other's toes, you know." Megan looked up at me, her eyes wide, clearly unsure of what was coming next. "Notes?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, pulling out a small notebook from my pocket and flipping it open. "You know, just some boundaries we should set. I think it'll help keep things clear between us. For example," I paused for effect, watching her expression closely. "No games here in the house. I think we should mutually respect our home as a space for just the two of us. It's our sanctuary, right? We shouldn't bring anyone else into it." Megan gasped slightly, caught off guard by how direct I was being. She hadn't expected me to get so specific. "And another thing," I continued, "when we're with other people, no disrespect toward each other. If you're going to be with this Daniel guy, I don't want to hear about it. And I won't tell you about my date either. It's only fair. We don't need to hurt each other more than we already have." Her fork froze in midair, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't enjoying this conversation at all. "Also," I added, "our shared plans come first. If we've got something planned together, no canceling or bailing out last minute to be with someone else. We're still a team, right?" Megan's hand trembled as she set her fork down. Her voice was weak when she spoke. "Brian, I don't know about this. It's all getting really complicated." I could see the doubt creeping in, and I pressed on, keeping my voice steady. I know it's complicated, Megan, but these are the rules we need if this is going to work. We can't lie to each other, and we can't pretend things haven't changed. At that moment, my phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the tense silence between us. I glanced at the screen, raised my eyebrows, and smirked. Hold that thought, I said, standing up from the table. I need to take this. It's important. I walked into our small office and closed the door behind me. Setting my phone to record, I answered the call with a low voice, knowing full well Megan was probably trying to listen. Hello, the caller said with a heavy accent. This is the IRS, and you owe us $1,326 in unpaid taxes from 2021. I smiled to myself. Perfect timing. Hey. I've been waiting for your call. I'm really looking forward to Friday night. What time works for you? There was a pause on the other end. What? No, sir, this is the IRS. Great. I interrupted, keeping my voice light. I'll pick you up around 7 o'clock, and we can head to that new restaurant downtown. After that, maybe we'll just head back to your place for the night. Sound good? I noticed a shadow under the door, small, hesitant footsteps. Megan was definitely listening. The scammer on the phone was getting flustered. What are you talking about? This is serious. You owe us $1,326. If you don't pay, we'll have to send the police to arrest you. Perfect. Let's skip dinner, then, I said, almost laughing now. We can go straight to your place and have some fun. The scammer was livid. This is not a joke. You're going to regret this. The police are on their way. All right, I replied, stifling a chuckle. Thanks for calling, babe. I'll see you on Friday. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. Then, I calmly opened the door to find Megan standing outside, her face ashen, her eyes wide. Megan stared at me, her voice shaky as she asked, "Who was that?" I suppressed a smirk and replied, "Just some scammer pretending to be the IRS, demanding gift cards. It's ridiculous that people fall for this nonsense." She didn't seem convinced, her eyes narrowing slightly. That didn't sound like a call from a scammer. Oh. I raised an eyebrow. So, you were listening? I tilted my head, the air quotes almost implied. What happened to those privacy talks you gave me after those sister calls? Her face flushed. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before we both returned to the table, though neither of us was interested in the Chinese food anymore. We ate quietly, the tension palpable, until Megan finally pushed her plate aside and spoke up. I don't want you going on a date with that woman from the gym this weekend. Her tone was stern, her eyes flashing with something close to anger. I looked up from my food, deliberately keeping my expression calm. And what do you expect me to do while you're out with Daniel? Stay home and knit? Her expression faltered. Brian, be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, Megan, I said, my voice hardening. Listen to me very carefully. If you want to change the rules of this marriage, you better believe I can play this game too. You don't get to make the rules and then expect me to sit quietly on the sidelines. If this is what you want, then fine. But if you think I'll just let you run around with someone else while I wait at home like a fool, you've got another thing coming. Megan recoiled slightly, taken aback by the intensity of my words. She frowned, her frustration boiling over. Why can't you be like Tony? He lets Darcy have her fun, and they're fine. I narrowed my eyes, my patience wearing thin. Well, maybe you should have married Tony instead. At that, Megan shoved her chair back, stood up from the table, and stormed out of the room, heading straight for our bedroom. The door slammed shut behind her. I sat there, the remnants of our dinner cold and untouched in front of me. The orange chicken, which had once been my favorite, tasted like cardboard. I packed the leftovers into the fridge, cleaning up the kitchen in silence, though my mind was racing. As I put the last container away, I considered going after her, bursting into the bedroom, and confronting her. But no, it wasn't time yet. She needed to stew on this. She needed to feel the weight of her decision. Instead, I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, thinking about what had just happened. Megan's outburst was unexpected. She hadn't shown much resistance before, but now she was starting to crack. That gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe she was realizing just how serious this situation had become. Maybe she was beginning to regret her choices. As I sat there, I thought about what I wanted out of this. Did I want to save our marriage? Did I still love her enough to forgive her? Or was it too late? I wasn't sure. The night dragged on, and eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was still dark, and I heard quiet sobs coming from the bedroom. Megan was crying. Good. Let her cry. I drifted in and out of sleep, and by the time the morning sun filtered through the curtains, I had made up my mind. Things were going to change, one way or another. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy sense of tension in the air. Megan and I barely spoke as we both got ready for work. The usual light-hearted banter and morning routines were replaced by silence and strained glances. I left the house before her, needing the space to clear my head and figure out what my next move would be. At work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering back to last night. I could still hear Megan's sobs echoing in my head. I didn't want to feel bad for her, not after everything she had put me through, but a part of me still cared. As much as I hated to admit it, I still loved her, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. When I got home that evening, Megan's car was already in the garage. I walked inside, trying to keep my emotions in check, but my mind was racing. I couldn't keep playing this game forever. As I entered the house, I found Megan sitting at the kitchen table. She had already laid out the leftover Chinese food from the night before, but neither of us looked particularly hungry. She glanced up at me as I walked in, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "We need to talk," I said, not wasting any time. Megan nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured toward the table. "Yeah. I think we do." We both sat down, and I reached into my bag, pulling out 2 folders. I had spent my lunch break preparing these, 2 options, 2 paths forward. One was labeled A, and the other, B. I placed them on the table in front of Megan, laying them face down. "What are these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Options," I replied, meeting her gaze. "One folder is a prenup. We set new rules for our marriage, boundaries that we both agree to. It's strict, and it won't be easy, but it's a way forward if we both want to make this work." Megan swallowed hard, staring at the folders. "And the other?" "The other is divorce papers. We split everything 50-50 and go our separate ways." Her face paled, and her eyes filled with fear. "Brian, no, we can't." I held up my hand, stopping her. "I don't want a divorce either, Megan. But I'm not going to live in a marriage where I can't trust you, where you're sneaking around with other men while I sit at home. That's not going to happen. So, these are the options. We either fix this, or we end it." Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared down at the folders. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, you did," I replied bluntly. "And now we have to decide how we're going to move forward." She sat there in silence, her hands trembling as she reached for the folder labeled A. She opened it and began reading the terms I had laid out: transparency, honesty, tracking apps, no outside relationships, regular check-ins, and rebuilding trust through time and effort. It was strict, but I had learned from experience that we needed rules if we were going to avoid ending up right back here again. "This is really strict," she muttered, wiping away a tear. It has to be, I said firmly. We're not just fixing a broken fence here, Megan. We're trying to save our marriage. She nodded slowly, but I could see the weight of the decision pressing down on her. After a long pause, she closed the folder and looked up at me. I'll agree to it, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't want to lose you. Her words sounded sincere, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. I don't want to lose you either, Megan. But things have to change. She nodded again, squeezing my hand tightly. They will. I promise. We sat there for a moment in silence, holding hands and reflecting on everything that had happened. The road ahead was going to be long and difficult, but for the first time in a while, it felt like there was a chance for us to rebuild what we had lost. As we sat there in the kitchen, holding hands, the weight of the situation finally began to sink in for both of us. Megan had agreed to the terms of our new prenup, and it felt like a step in the right direction. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's not something you can easily glue back together. After a few moments of silence, Megan let go of my hand and wiped her eyes. I'll start making changes right away, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I'll cancel my plans with Daniel, and I'll make it clear to him that this is over. I swear, Brian, I haven't done anything physical with him. I was just, I don't know, caught up in a fantasy. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Part of me was glad she hadn't cheated, but another part of me felt betrayed by the emotional connection she had formed with this guy. I believe you, I said, though it took effort to get the words out. But you need to understand that it's going to take time for me to fully trust you again. I know, she whispered. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The reality of the situation was starting to settle in, and I knew that the hard work was just beginning. That night, we went to bed together, but the space between us felt larger than it had ever been. Megan lay close to me, but I could sense her hesitation, her guilt. I wasn't ready to fully let her back in yet, and she knew it. Still, we held each other, and as the night wore on, I could hear her softly crying in the darkness. In the morning, we both woke up feeling drained, but there was a quiet determination in the air. We had agreed to try, to fight for our marriage, and that gave us a sense of direction. Megan kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, her eyes still red from crying, but there was something different about her, like she was trying to make amends. While she was at work, I spent the day thinking about the future. I couldn't ignore what had happened, but I also couldn't deny that I wanted to move past it. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild our life together. The next few weeks were filled with tension and awkward moments. Megan kept her word, sticking to the terms of our new agreement, but it wasn't easy. There were times when I caught myself wondering if she was really committed to fixing things or if she was just going through the motions. Then, one night, something unexpected happened. We were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when Megan's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "Who is it?" I asked, immediately on edge. "It's Betty, my boss," she said, showing me the screen. "She never calls this late." She answered the phone, and I listened as the conversation unfolded. At first, it seemed like a regular work-related call, but then Megan's expression changed. Her face went pale. "You're kidding. When did this happen?" she asked, her voice trembling. She listened for a few more seconds before hanging up the phone, her hands shaking as she set it down on the table. "What's going on?" I asked, my gut telling me it wasn't good. Megan looked at me with wide eyes, fear written all over her face. "It's Darcy and Daniel. Betty just told me that Tony, Darcy's husband, caught them together. He came home early, found them in bed, and he beat Daniel so badly that he's in the hospital." Darcy tried to stop him, but Tony knocked her down too. She's in the hospital with a broken jaw. I blinked, stunned. What? Megan nodded, her hands still shaking. Tony's in jail now. It's all over the company, everyone's talking about it. They're not sure if Daniel will be able to see out of one of his eyes. Tony really messed him up. I didn't know what to say. I sat there, absorbing the shock of what had happened. Darcy had been the one pushing Megan toward this reckless behavior, and now it had all blown up in her face, literally. Megan's voice broke the silence. Brian. I was so close to being in the same position. If I had gone through with it, if I had let things get to that point, she shook her head, tears filling her eyes. I don't know what would have happened. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine fear and regret in her eyes. I can't believe I almost destroyed everything, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Brian. I really am. I watched Megan as she broke down, her hands covering her face as tears streamed down. It was clear that she was fully realizing the severity of what she had almost done. The idea of her following Darcy's path, of being caught in something as messy and destructive, suddenly seemed all too real. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Megan, I'm not going to lie, this whole thing has been a nightmare. But the fact that you're here, that you're realizing it before it's too late, that counts for something. She lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face looking at me, searching for any sign of hope. Do you really think we can get past this? Do you think you can forgive me? I paused, weighing my words carefully. I don't know how long it'll take, and I don't know if things will ever be exactly the way they were before. But I do know that I want to try. I want to give us a chance. Her lip quivered, and she nodded. I'll do anything, Brian. I swear, I'll never make this mistake again. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were finally on the same page. The barriers between us hadn't fully disappeared, but they were starting to crumble. And that was something. Over the next few days, the story of Darcy and Daniel's affair spread like wildfire through Megan's workplace. Everyone was talking about it, and it became clear that the company was taking a hard stance on workplace relationships. Daniel would likely lose his job, and Darcy's career was all but ruined. The consequences were real, and Megan saw firsthand what her decisions could have led to. We didn't talk much about Darcy or Daniel after that. It was too close, too raw. Instead, Megan focused on rebuilding our marriage, and I focused on giving her the chance to prove herself. We started spending more time together, doing the things we used to enjoy, hiking, going to the movies, and just talking. Really talking. It wasn't always easy, but there were moments when I could feel the old connection coming back. One Friday night, about a month after everything had come to a head, Megan suggested something unexpected. Why don't we take a weekend away? Just the two of us. I was caught off guard. You mean like a vacation? She smiled, though there was a hint of nervousness in her expression. Yeah. We've been working on things, but I think we need some time to ourselves, away from everything. No distractions, no reminders of what happened, just us. It wasn't a bad idea. We hadn't really had time to just be a couple, without the weight of everything hanging over us. Where were you thinking? There's a little cabin up by Mount Rainier, she said. We could rent it for the weekend. Get some fresh air, hike a little, and just reconnect. I hesitated for a moment. Getting away from the city, from the reminders of what had happened, sounded appealing. Maybe it was what we needed. Okay, I agreed. Let's do it. The next weekend, we packed up the car and drove out to the cabin. The drive itself felt therapeutic, the miles of trees and mountains giving us a sense of escape. When we arrived, the cabin was small but cozy, nestled in a quiet clearing surrounded by tall evergreens. It felt like a different world. The first night, we sat by the fire, sipping wine and talking about lighter things, memories from when we first started dating, funny stories from our early years of marriage. It felt like we were rediscovering each other, one conversation at a time. The next day, we decided to take a hike up one of the nearby trails. The air was crisp, and the views of the mountains were breathtaking. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were just us. No tension, no unspoken resentment, just two people enjoying each other's company. At one point, as we were walking along the trail, Megan reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. I squeezed her hand, and we continued hiking in comfortable silence. That evening, back at the cabin, Megan looked at me with a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. "I love you, Brian," she said quietly. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want you to know that I'm all in. I'm committed to this. To us." I leaned in and kissed her, feeling the warmth of the fire on our faces. "I love you too," I whispered. That night, for the first time since all of this had started, we made love, not out of duty or routine, but because we genuinely wanted to be close to each other. It wasn't a magical fix for everything, but it was a step in the right direction. Several months passed after that weekend, and life slowly began to feel normal again. Megan and I stuck to the terms of our agreement, but over time, we didn't need to reference it as much. Trust was rebuilding, bit by bit. Our connection was stronger than it had been in years. We communicated more openly, spent more time together, and prioritized each other over everything else. Megan completely distanced herself from Darcy, who had left the company after the scandal. Daniel, still recovering from his injuries, was fired, and the incident left a permanent mark on everyone involved. It served as a reminder of how fragile relationships could be and the consequences of bad decisions. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the couch planning a quiet weekend, Megan's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Betty again," she said. "I wonder what she wants." She answered the call, and I watched as her expression shifted from casual to stunned. "You're serious? Wow. When did this happen?" Megan hung up the phone and sat quietly for a moment before turning to me. "Betty just told me that the company is tightening its fraternization policies even further because of what happened with Darcy and Daniel. They're going to be monitoring everything now, and anyone caught violating the rules will be terminated immediately." I nodded. It made sense after what had happened. Probably for the best. Megan sighed and leaned back against the couch. "I'm just glad that's all behind us now. I can't believe how close I came to ruining everything." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We've come a long way since then. And we're not done yet, but we're getting there." She smiled at me, her eyes filled with a sense of relief and gratitude. "I'm so lucky to have you, Brian. I don't deserve you." I shook my head. "It's not about deserving. It's about both of us being willing to fight for this, for each other." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in comfortable silence, the weight of the past months finally starting to lift. Our marriage had been tested in ways I never could have imagined. But through it all, we found a way to come back stronger. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought it might all fall apart. But in the end, we chose each other. We chose to rebuild, to fight for what we had, and to not let one mistake define the rest of our lives. Life isn't perfect, and neither is marriage. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a real shot at making it work. As the evening sun filtered through the living room windows, casting a warm glow over us, I realized something important. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't with others, they're with ourselves. And when we win those battles, that's when real growth happens. For Megan and me, this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where we both knew the value of what we had and were determined to never take it for granted again.